Okay people, so in 2021, there's no doubt in my mind after Eden's Zero debut as an anime over on Netflix, you cannot deny that Hiro Mashima is officially the DJ Khaled of mangaka, baby, because he just hit us with another one. Ooh, I know that joke is a little bit old, but it felt very suitable. That's right, people. A lot of y'all have been hitting me up about Eden Zero. In fact, drop a like if you've been wanting me to talk about Eden Zero for quite some time, whether you know about it and you're like, yo, ForneverWorld, it's time to talk about it, or you've been intrigued, you want to hear something about it, whatever the case may be, definitely drop a like because this has been a long time coming. I haven't talked about Eden Zero, the manga in particular, in roughly 3 years. I want to say I made a couple of videos back when it was fresh, maybe 15 chapters in or something like that, and then I just went radio silent on it for a while, not because I didn't like it, but it's just, you know, it gets lost in the shuffle. There's so many other things. On top of that, it's a Kodansha title. Normally the stuff that I review all comes out together on Weekly Shonen Jump. This is Weekly Shonen Magazine, so it's just been a whole big debacle and whatnot. But as of recent, the anime dropped finally over on Netflix. It's been out for quite some time over there in Japan, but it was region locked, or it was Netflix jailed, so to speak. We got 12 episodes so far. It's produced by JC Staff, which they could be a hit or a miss depending on what their mood is, but produced by JC Staff. And for the first 12 that we got, and from, you know, what I remember from the manga, I definitely gotta say, coming fresh off the heels of Fairy Tail, that Eden Zero, well, we'll talk about it. Hit my intro, lad.
No matter how you move, get it done. No matter how you move, get it done. No matter how you move, get it done. No matter how you move, get it done.
Okay, so it's kind of crazy that I have this one video on my channel that every time something happens with Eden Zero, like there's an announcement about the anime debut, the anime hit Netflix, whatever it is, that video always pops back up with a lot of traction, a lot of people getting very upset, because that was my initial, I guess you would say, first impression off the images of Eden Zero back when Hiro Mashima first revealed what the cast looked like. It was like a big color page of all the characters, and I was very, at the time, upset about like, yo, oh my god, all these characters look so similar to Fairy Tail. Now, don't get me wrong, I understand that artists, they have their, you know what I'm saying, their art style, their signature art style. The same thing was probably said back in the day when Hiro Mashima went from Rave Master to Fairy Tail. In fact, he did something similar to what happened with Eden Zero, where Plu was in Rave Master and then he put Plu in Fairy Tail, and it seems to be the case as well because Happy is in the series. Now, if you don't know about Eden Zero, essentially think of like the vibe that you get somewhat from Fairy Tail, but in space, and from what I've gotten so far, done a lot better. The main cast of characters, like, you know, the main ones is Shiki, Rebecca, Happy, which it's not the same Happy from Fairy Tail. This one is actually like robotic, animatronic, I guess you would say. There's also Weiss, there's Homura, there's a lot of characters that come along the way, but it just starts off mainly, think of like when Lucy was looking for the Fairy Tail Guild and she runs into Natsu. It's something similar in a way where Rebecca runs into Shiki, and Shiki to a certain degree, especially earlier on in the series, like the first few episodes, Shiki felt like almost a parody to a certain degree of what people say about Fairy Tail and Natsu and all that jazz, because Shiki's big thing is that he wants friends. He grew up as the only human on this planet filled with robots, and even though they treated him well, and, you know, the Demon King robot treated him well and all that jazz, ultimately he has this affinity for wanting friends, and he doesn't care even if you treat him like shit. Like, oh yeah, yo, so we're friends now, right? So he kind of almost felt to a certain degree like a parody of a lot of the things people hated about Fairy Tail and about previous works from Hiro Mashima, but especially Fairy Tail. And Rebecca straight up reminds me of Lucy. In fact, it feels like the narrative is from the perspective of Rebecca, from her point of view. And if you're asking me off the jump, off the gate, you don't know nothing about Eden Zero, you're just asking me, hey, is Eden Zero like Fairy Tail? It does have a lot of elements of Fairy Tail in terms of like the characters feel somewhat similar. There's some quirky stuff. The character designs look similar. Like there's Elsie, is it Elsie or Elsa Crimson, which is straight up like Urza with an eye patch on. It's Urza with an eye patch on all the way, but I guess she comes across a little bit more like a space criminal-esque in a way because of the way she moves and shit like that. But character design wise, there's a lot of characters that do look similar to Fairy Tail characters, but there's also characters that don't. Like Weiss, even though he is like in the design of like a Hiro Mashima character, he doesn't necessarily look like straight up anybody from Fairy Tail, and I really like him. In fact, I believe it was called Norma, the Planet Norma arc, that first arc that they, you know, go back in time 50 years or some shit like that, which they really didn't, and it kind of expanded the universe, because there's a lot of really cool things in Eden Zero, and I know I'm all over the place with this one, but I'm just spitballing you guys, because again, Eden Zero's anime is only technically halfway released over here, because it's supposed to be 24, and we only got 12, but I really like that arc. It kind of reminded me to a certain degree of like Back to the Future, where we have future Weiss, that he's like an old man, but we went back in time, and Weiss, when he was younger, he was a little bit of a crook and a knucklehead, and it just kind of gave me a little bit of that Back to the Future vibe in a way, but then it did its own thing, because it wasn't really that they went to the past, and that was something, a big introduction that I like, that from these 12 episodes, we see it reoccur a couple different times, of this monster creature, a space creature, that ultimately can eat a planet's time, and essentially it doesn't change the universe or anything like that, it just makes that planet go back depending on how much time that monster eats. And in this one, in Norma, it was like, again, 50 years, but there was another planet down the road that it ate like 1200 years, and everybody freaking died, and the planet went back to its natural roots and shit like that. So that's something that is very interesting and unique, and I don't think I've ever seen something like that executed in space time travel fiction and shit. Like, Hiro Mashima took a concept that is very difficult to execute, and that's like, you know, sci-fi, space travel, all of that jazz. If you don't do it right, it can fail. Perfect example, Samurai 8, Kishimoto's manga, you know, creator of Naruto, he tried to do something similar. It didn't work. Honestly, it got canceled after 42 chapters, and ultimately it wasn't a success. However, Hiro Mashima's Eden Zero, on the other hand, has been pretty successful, and the anime's been doing pretty well. And that's because, again, I feel like he used similar elements that you like from a fairy tale. Like, you like the vibe, you like that the characters are kind of optimistic, it's not too serious. Like, I think where Hiro Mashima kept some of the formula the same, and that's what's making it thrive, Kishimoto tried to go a whole different direction. It got really detailed and stuff like that, and early Naruto wasn't really detailed or anything like that. In fact, all of Naruto wasn't as complex as what Samurai 8 was, but again, we're not here to talk about Samurai 8. That still is a wound on my heart. Nah, it's been a while. It is what it is. But yeah, with Eden Zero, there are beats that kind of remind me of Fairy Tail, with, like, for example, Rebecca being in bad predicaments with perverts that want to do stuff to her, because there's some light fan service. I definitely wouldn't say that it's on the level of fan service that Fairy Tail has. There's fan service, but for the most part, it's here and there and few far between, and especially from what I read in the manga, because ultimately I had read, I want to say, like 50 chapters of the manga, it never really gets that bad. In fact, it gets less and less as the series progressed. And the overall goal, I like that there's actually like a very good in place goal for Eden Zero. Essentially, well, for starters, the main character, or one of the main characters, Rebecca, she's a VTuber, and for me, somebody that, in case you don't know, I've been doing YouTube professionally since 2011, and I started doing YouTube in 2010. Like, this was so freaking relatable, because in their universe they have VTubers where she's trying to get views and she's trying to get subscribers and all of that jazz, and it felt like, holy cow, Hiro Mashima really made a 21st century modern day type of story, because yeah, it kind of felt relatable for me on a more personal level of shit that, like, you know, especially early on in creating content and trying to make a name for yourself out in the interwebs, like, it just felt relatable. So I really like that aspect, and basically she just wants to be a popular content creator on VTube. She got some adversaries throughout the way of like people that want to make a name for themselves as well. I want to say there's somebody that it looks straight up like an older version of Wendy. I can't remember her name, to be honest with you, but she's kind of like a prick to Rebecca, and they have a little bit of a competition, although she's way ahead of Rebecca in the content space game. It's interesting, and I like it. It's something that, it's a more fresh idea that people aren't really executing, especially in the anime and manga realm, and I think Hiro Mashima is doing a great job on that aspect. But then her and Shiki in general, because Shiki's goal is he wants to meet Mother, which that is an interesting concept of what Hiro Mashima set forth, is this giant woman that is almost like a god in space that a lot of people don't even know if she actually even exists, but basically they believe that if you reach Mother, you'll be able to have a wish granted. So that's a big goal that they have. And then they got the spaceship, the Eden Zero, but they got to collect stars. Like, there's a lot of little goals all over the place, which is dope. It actually gives a lot of purpose. It makes it so that we can observe the development of their journey as it continues. Like, okay, we need X amount of stars to get the Eden Zero going. Boom, mother is said to be here. Boom. So there's a lot of things that you could kind of track their progress as the story moves forward. And from the first 12 episodes and even the first 50 chapters of Eden Zero that I experienced so far, I gotta say, I haven't seen any of the major blunders or major problems that plagued Fairy Tail in Eden Zero. It honestly seems like Hiro Mashima, for the most part, learned his lesson about some of the bullshit that he pulled in Fairy Tail, because there wasn't anything that was jarring to me. There wasn't anything that I was like, Hiro Mashima, classic bullshit, here we go. Like, I didn't get that, especially from the first 12. The first 12 was just like straight up like, hey, we're getting started. Okay, we got this ether gear, and you know, he could do gravity, Shiki and shit like that. He could control gravity and stuff like that, make himself jump all over the place. Like, it's just really cool. Like, it's a really cool little shonen so far from what I gather with the anime. I think the manga expands a little more again as it continues forward, but from what I got from the anime, if you're wondering like, should you check out Eden Zero, if you want a cool little shonen, a lot of the good aspects that you like from Fairy Tail and the character feelings that you get from Fairy Tail, it got that in there. It doesn't have the same blunders as Fairy Tail thus far, and the art and animation for the anime is pretty dope too. Nothing out of this world, but it was pretty good. And it seems like as the story has progressed that it's starting to leave behind a lot of the, oh, this character looks like this one from Fairy Tail, that one looks like that from Fairy Tail, and starting to come into its own. Like, there's characters like the sister, the nun character. She kind of reminds me in a way of like Fire Force now that I think about it, but you know, it doesn't look like a character that you would see from Fairy Tail. There's a lot of newer characters that have their own design, own purpose, own motive, so it's not completely what you think, again, from that initial impression you're gonna get when you see the art of, oh shit, this looks like Fairy Tail. And ultimately, so far, I like Eden Zero. I'm gonna just straight up say it. I actually enjoy it. I think it's doing what it wants to do. I think it knows that it's not too serious. It's not taking itself too serious. There are some moments that is kind of like, holy shit, like when that robot that was being abused by their owner or their temporary owner and made the robot forget their previous owner. Like, that was kind of dark and twisted in its own right, but it wasn't too dark. And yeah, it seems like a fun adventure, a fun little shonen thus far. I'm looking forward to watching the next set of episodes whenever Netflix drops them, and I probably will jump back into the manga because I want to say maybe the anime will take me right to where I left off in the manga around the 50s or something along the lines with that. But yeah, I'm having fun with it, and so far, in comparison to Fairy Tail, I like it, and it doesn't have the same problems that plagued Fairy Tail, but it is early on. It is early on, and Fairy Tail didn't really get that problematic until later on down the road as well. But I guess you could also add in the fact that Hiro Mashima came out in an interview and said with Fairy Tail, he basically wrote that shit blind. He didn't have really anything planned out. In the previous manga before that with Raidmaster, he had most of it planned out. In this one, he's doing a bit of both. He's leaving room for a change and whatnot, but he does have some elements set up and some stories set up along the way of like, okay, we're gonna go from this point A to point B, but everything in between is kind of blind for him. So I like that approach. It gives that hopefully we won't have the same BS happening with Eden Zero, because so far it's cool. It's interesting. It's not a magic based series. It's with this ether gear, but the action is kind of dope, and in general it's just it's a cool story, bro. But I'm very curious what you guys think. If you have seen the Eden Zero anime up until this point, whether you're just watching the, you know, first 12 that is on Netflix, or you've been watching the Japanese episodes that are, you know, up to date at this point in the 20s, or is it over yet? It's somewhere around there at this point. How do you feel about the Eden Zero anime? How do you feel about it in comparison to Fairy Tail? And if you're watching it just like by yourself as a standalone, you've never watched Fairy Tail before, how do you feel about it as its own? Is it dope? Is it, you know, too weak for you? The story? Who's your favorite characters so far? I really like Homura. She kind of reminds me in a way of, I think it was Kagura from Fairy Tail, but she has her own little quirky nature of like, she can't help but to express her thoughts. Like, whatever she thinks, she just spits it out of her mouth. So that's kind of interesting. I'll say this. I actually, so far, I like Shiki more than Natsu, because Natsu kind of felt a little bit more quote-unquote seasoned in the beginning of Fairy Tail, while Shiki, like, he was just a brute that came from like living with robots and shit. So I kind of almost like Shiki more than I liked Natsu. Rebecca, she's very similar to Lucy, just being honest with you. The only difference is I'd probably argue that I relate way more to Rebecca than probably majority of the characters of Fairy Tail, because I've been doing content creation on YouTube for a decade plus, and she's trying to make it as a VTuber, so that's dope. And I like the modern nature of it. Honestly, I feel like Hiro Mashima is doing the best he can with a very difficult story to tell, sci-fi, space travel, and all that jazz, and I think he's doing an okay job so far. We'll see, we'll check back down the road, but as it stands right now, just check Eden Zero out. You might have a good time. But that's all I have for this one. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. If you liked anything I had to say or enjoyed the video, drop me a like. I'd greatly appreciate it. And if you want more from me, make sure to subscribe. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram. Hit that bell to get all notifications. And if you want to follow any of my other social media, links are in the description below. I'm ForneverWorld, and as always, people, have an awesome day. And remember the golden rule: anime and manga for life, boy. Have an awesome day. Peace in, and Hiro Mashima is back with another one. Have an awesome day.
So just go to